At 7:42 a.m. on August 17, 1943, Technical Sergeant James McKenna crouched under the left wing of a P-38 Lightning at Doadorura Airfield in New Guinea. He was watching his pilot, Lieutenant Robert Hayes, prepare for a mission that might be his last. Hayes was only 23 years old, had flown 6 missions and hadn't scored a single kill yet. The Japanese were sending 18 Mitsubishi Zero fighters to intercept the morning patrol, and Hayes was about to face them head-on. McKenna had been maintaining P-38s for 8 months. He knew every bolt and cable inside them. The twin-engine fighter was fast and strong, especially at high altitudes, but it had one serious flaw. It couldn't turn as tightly as a Japanese Zero. The Zero was lighter, more flexible, and could make a full turn in half the time it took a P-38. That small difference often meant the difference between life and death. American pilots were trained to never try to outturn a Zero. Instead, they were told to rely on speed and altitude, dive in, fire, and climb out. Never engage in a turning fight. Hayes had followed those instructions 5 times, but it never worked. The Japanese pilots were clever. They tricked Americans into turning fights, slipped inside their turns, and shot them down. In just 6 weeks, the 5th Air Force had lost 37 P-38s, mostly because they were caught turning. McKenna had seen too many good pilots die that way. Many were young, barely older than boys. They took off full of confidence and never returned. The manuals blamed pilot error, saying they weren't following orders, but McKenna knew that wasn't true. The problem wasn't the pilots, it was the airplane's control cables. Inside the P-38, the aileron cables ran through the twin tails and forward to the wings. There was a bit of slack, tiny, less than half an inch, but it caused a delay between moving the control stick and the plane's response. At high speed it didn't matter, but in slow, tight turns that delay was deadly. McKenna had told his superior about it 2 months earlier. The officer brushed it off, saying it was within factory limits. Adjusting it would break warranty rules, and no field mechanic had permission to modify the system. That sort of change could only come from the Lockheed factory in California, thousands of miles away. So McKenna decided to take matters into his own hands. He broke every rule in the maintenance manual. Taking a piece of piano wire from a damaged plane, he cut it into a 6-inch piece, bent it into a Z, and attached it as a tensioner to tighten the left aileron cable on Hayes's P-38. It took just 8 minutes. It added a small amount of tension, barely noticeable, but completely removed the slack. Nobody noticed. The inspectors checked oil and ammo, not cable tension. McKenna said nothing. He just watched Hayes take off toward the Japanese lines, not knowing if he'd ever come back. That flight would change how every P-38 in the Pacific was flown. McKenna still remembered the first pilot he lost, Lieutenant David Chen, on July 9, 1943. Chen had only been there 3 weeks. They often talked in the mornings about home. Chen was from Sacramento, McKenna from Long Beach. Chen's plane came back from one mission with bullet holes and a near-death story about a Zero that almost shot him down. He said the plane felt slow to roll, like there was a delay. Only his wingman's cover saved him. Weeks later, Chen died flying a different P-38, caught again in a turning fight. The same story. Couldn't roll away fast enough. Then came Captain William Morrison, an experienced ace with 11 kills. On August 3rd, his squadron faced 8 Zeros. Morrison downed one, but when he tried to roll out from a counterattack, he radioed that his controls felt sluggish. His plane didn't respond quickly enough. He was shot down. His mechanic, Rodriguez, McKenna's friend, tore the wreckage apart looking for answers. Everything checked out perfectly. The report again said pilot error. By mid-August, McKenna had seen 17 pilots die. Every one of them described the same problem. The plane felt slow in turns. Most thought that was just how the P-38 handled, being a big fighter. But McKenna knew that tiny slack in the cables was the true killer. He began listening to the sound of the cables when he worked on them. Tight cables made a high twang. Loose ones made a duller sound. Every P-38 sounded just a bit loose. Within spec, yes, but too loose for survival. He told Rodriguez about it, saying there was an unofficial fix. But it was risky. Doing it would break regulations and could get them both court-martialed. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Robert Hayes was getting desperate. He had been flying in New Guinea for 2 months. 6 missions, no kills, Not because he was bad, but because he was playing by the book. On one mission, he followed the manual exactly. Dove from the sun, got behind a zero, lined up the shot. But by the time his plane turned where he wanted, the zero was gone. On another mission, he and his wingman were attacked by 4 zeros. His plane reacted too slowly again, and he barely made it back with damage. On August 14th, his best friend, Lieutenant Thomas Parker, was killed in a dogfight. Parker's last words over the radio were that his plane wasn't turning fast enough. Hayes heard the gunfire, the scream, and then silence. Parker's bed was empty the next morning. The official report blamed pilot error. McKenna had worked on Parker's plane that morning. It was perfect. By then, McKenna knew for sure what was killing them. The slight delay the manual said was acceptable. It wasn't. It was deadly. Every morning, McKenna worked surrounded by the smell of oil, fuel, and burning metal. Planes came and went, but some never returned. And he was left behind, fixing more of them, watching more young men walk to their deaths in machines that weren't fast enough to save them. On the evening of August 16th, Hayes found McKenna in the maintenance area. He asked if there was anything at all, that could make the plane roll faster. He didn't care about rules or approval. He just wanted a fighting chance. McKenna looked into the young man's eyes and saw fear, the kind of fear that comes from knowing your next mission might be your last. McKenna told him quietly, "Come back in the morning. I'll see what I can do." That night, McKenna stayed alone in the hangar, working on Hayes's plane, breaking every rule he had ever been taught, because sometimes saving a life mattered more than following the book. The maintenance hangar was silent after 11 p.m. Most of the crew had gone to sleep. The only sounds came from far-off generators and insects buzzing near the lights. The air was thick with the smell of oil and humidity. McKenna knelt beside Hayes's P-38, pulled off the inspection panel on the left boom, and felt the metal still warm from the day's heat. Inside, the aileron control cable ran through pulleys toward the tail. He grabbed the cable and tugged. It moved just slightly before tightening. Too much slack. It didn't feel right. He knew it wasn't right. The piece of piano wire he planned to use came from a wrecked P-38 that had crashed 2 weeks earlier. He'd taken some spare parts before it was scrapped, including this 6-inch piece of tough piano wire from the rudder trim system. He hadn't known why he kept it, until now. Sitting on the hangar floor, he bent the wire into a Z shape using pliers. The metal resisted, cutting his thumb when he slipped. Blood smeared the wire, but he didn't stop. After 8 minutes, it was ready. That Z-shape would act as a small tensioner to remove the cable's slack. Fitting it into the plane was harder. The space inside the boom was tight. McKenna had to use one hand while holding a flashlight with the other. The light beam jumped around, shadows shifting across the inside of the aircraft. His shoulder was pressed against the frame, the metal digging into his arm as sweat ran down his back. He loosened the cable connection, dropped a small pin, and had to feel around in the dark for several minutes before finding it again. All the while he could feel his heartbeat pounding. If anyone caught him making this unauthorized change, he could be court-martialed, maybe even sent to prison. But if he didn't do it, Hayes might die on his next mission. He slipped the piano wire into the cable system, reconnecting it carefully. It fit snugly, and he forced the pin through until it locked. When he pulled on the cable to test it, the slack was gone. The control surface moved immediately. It was perfect. McKenna reattached the inspection panel, cleaned his tools, wiped the blood from his hands, and left the hangar at 1:15 a.m. The night outside was warm and still. Somewhere in the distance, engines rumbled, likely Japanese planes on a night raid. The sound made his stomach twist. He had just broken multiple rules, used a non-standard part, changed a flight control system without permission. If the fix failed, Hayes could crash and McKenna would be blamed. But if it worked, maybe Hayes would live. McKenna lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling until dawn. At 6:30 a.m., he walked to the flight line. He watched the crew prepare Hayes's plane, loading fuel and ammunition. He saw Hayes walking toward it, calm but serious, climbing into the cockpit. At 7:42, the P-38 roared down the runway and rose into the sky, joining 16 other fighters heading toward enemy territory. All McKenna could do now was wait. The battle began at 8:14 a.m. Hayes's group of 4 P-38s met 9 Japanese Zeros at 13,000 feet over the Huon Gulf. The sun was behind them, ideal conditions for an attack. Hayes was flying third in formation. The lead pilot gave the signal and they dove. Hayes picked a target at the rear of the enemy formation. As he descended, his speed climbed to 350 mph. The Zero filled his gun sight. He fired, the cannons and machine guns blazing, but most shots missed. The Zero rolled away sharply and dove. Hayes rolled after it, and that's when he felt it. The plane responded instantly. No hesitation, no lag. It moved exactly when he moved the stick. It was like flying a new aircraft. The P-38 rolled and turned with perfect control. Hayes pulled into the dive, lined up his target and fired again. Bullets tore through the Zero's body, and its engine exploded in flames. It spun downward, trailing black smoke, his first confirmed kill. Before he could celebrate, his wingman warned of more Zeros diving from above. Hayes looked up and saw 3 of them coming straight for him. He pushed the throttle forward and climbed, but they were faster in descent. He had no choice but to fight. Every instinct told him to run, to stick to the manual, but that would only get him killed. He rolled hard left, pulled into a turn, and the P-38 responded like lightning. The lead Zero tried to follow but couldn't react fast enough. Hayes fired, hitting the enemy's wing. The plane folded and fell apart. 2 kills. The remaining Zeros tried to force him into a defensive scissor maneuver. Hayes matched every move. Each time they turned, his aircraft rolled instantly. No delay, no struggle, just smooth, sharp motion. The P-38 felt alive, like it was part of him. One enemy pilot made a mistake and lost speed. Hayes caught him in his sights, fired from close range, and the Zero disintegrated. The debris hit Hayes's plane as it fell past. 3 kills in less than a minute. The last Zero fled. Low on ammo and fuel, Hayes climbed back up and regrouped with his unit. The whole fight lasted only 7 minutes. When he landed back at Doadura at 9:03 a.m., McKenna was waiting on the runway. Hayes climbed out, hands shaking, drenched in sweat. He looked at McKenna and said just 2 words. It worked. What neither of them knew was that 6 other pilots had witnessed the fight from above. Captain Frank Mitchell, a flight leader, had watched in disbelief. Hayes's P-38 was rolling faster than any he'd ever seen. It looked lighter, more agile, impossible for a Lightning. Mitchell knew Hayes wasn't that experienced. Something had changed in the airplane itself. After landing, Mitchell found Hayes in the debriefing room, still trembling as he filled out his report. 3 confirmed kills. When Mitchell asked what was different about the plane, Hayes said he didn't know, only that it felt faster and sharper. Then he suggested Mitchell talk to McKenna. 2 hours later, Mitchell found McKenna back in the maintenance area, his hands black with grease. When he asked directly what McKenna had done, the sergeant told him everything. The piano wire, the modification, the risk. Mitchell listened quietly, then asked if McKenna could do the same for his own plane. McKenna warned him it wasn't approved or tested. If something went wrong, they could both face serious charges. Mitchell didn't care. He'd lost 4 men in a month, all in turning fights they couldn't escape. If there was a way to save lives, he was willing to take the risk. That night, McKenna modified Mitchell's P-38. The next morning, Mitchell flew it and returned amazed. The plane rolled faster, more smoothly, like a real fighter should. Soon his wingman wanted it too. Within days, 9 planes in the squadron had been modified. Word spread quickly. Some mechanics refused, afraid of breaking rules. Others secretly followed McKenna's method. Cut the piano wire, bend it into a Z, install it, and tighten the cable. It took only 8 minutes. No official reports were filed. No one wrote it down. It spread quietly, pilot to pilot, mechanic to mechanic. And on August 22nd, Hayes shot down 2 more Zeros, with the same modification that had changed everything. By the end of August, Mitchell had shot down 3 enemy planes. Other pilots soon started returning from missions with confirmed kills too. The numbers spoke for themselves. Lieutenant James Watkins, a crew chief with the 49th Fighter Group at Gusup, heard rumors about a secret modification from a pilot who had come from Doadura. Watkins didn't believe it at first, but he decided to try it on 1 aircraft. The next day, the pilot flew his mission and scored his first kill after 2 long months of combat without success. Watkins then modified 4 more planes, and soon other crew chiefs in the 49th were doing the same. By early September, around 40 P-38s in New Guinea had this hidden modification. The engineering officer at Doadura noticed something strange but couldn't figure it out. Everything looked normal during inspections because the crew chief secretly removed the tensioners before checks and reinstalled them afterward. The pilots and mechanics knew the truth, but none of them told the officers. The results were clear. In July, for every Japanese Zero destroyed, 2 P-38s were lost. By August, the ratio had improved to 1.3 to 1. By September, it was nearly even. Something had clearly changed, even though officially no one could explain why. The Japanese began to notice too. In late August, reports from Japanese fighter units mentioned that the American P-38s had suddenly become more agile. They were turning faster, rolling more quickly and reversing direction with surprising speed. Tactics that had worked for months were now failing. One of Japan's top aces, Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai, with 64 confirmed kills, encountered a P-38 over Wewak on September 3, 1943. He used his usual trick: draw the American into a turn, wait for the P-38 to roll, then snap his own plane around to cut inside. But this time the P-38 rolled faster than he expected. Instead of gaining the advantage, Sakai found himself facing the American head-on. He barely avoided a collision and had to dive away. Sakai returned to base confused and angry. Other Japanese pilots were reporting the same thing. The Americans weren't flying differently, but their planes were reacting faster, just enough to throw off the timing that Japanese pilots had mastered. Japanese intelligence tried to find out what had changed. They examined wrecked P-38s but found nothing unusual. Everything looked exactly the same. Same engines, same weapons, same design. They never realized that the secret was hidden deep inside the aircraft's boom, a tiny 6-inch piece of piano wire that looked like a regular part. Even if they had found it, they wouldn't have understood its purpose. By mid-September, Japanese pilots were losing planes at a rate they hadn't seen since the early days of the war. The psychological effect was huge. For 2 years, Zero pilots had dominated the skies, confident that no American plane could match their agility. But now that belief was fading fast. Pilots who once attacked boldly were becoming cautious, unsure if their tactics still worked. The Japanese tried new approaches. Some avoided turning fights and used hit-and-run tactics instead, but that meant giving up the Zero's greatest strength, its ability to outmaneuver. Others tried to fight more aggressively, closing in tighter before firing. But without superior maneuverability, that only made them easier targets. In September, several experienced pilots died using tactics that had worked perfectly just weeks before. They were fighting an invisible enemy, a change they couldn't see or understand. You can't develop tactics against something you don't even know exists. By the end of September, Japan's 11th Air Fleet had lost 38 fighters to P-38s, while the Americans lost only 22. The tables had turned. For the first time in the Pacific War, P-38s were shooting down Zeros faster than they were being lost. Japanese command finally issued an order: avoid fighting P-38s unless you have a clear numerical advantage. The once feared Zero had become the hunted. And it all happened because of one small piece of piano wire that wasn't even supposed to be there. The modification was never officially approved during the war. In October 1943, a maintenance inspector at Doadura discovered inconsistent cable tension readings. When he investigated, he found the piano wire tensioners and filed a report. The paperwork moved slowly through command offices for weeks. The problem was simple. The modification broke regulations, but it clearly worked. Squadrons using it had better kill ratios and fewer losses. The officers had to decide whether to punish the mechanics or quietly accept the results. In November, Lockheed engineers arrived in New Guinea to test the change. After examining the planes and running flight tests, they concluded that the modification was both safe and effective. In fact, they said it should have been part of the original design. Lockheed later built the same improvement into the new P-38J model, which entered production in December 1943. But McKenna, the man who created the fix, never received credit. His name wasn't mentioned in any report or award. The official document said the improvement came from Lockheed's engineering research. Hayes survived the war. He flew 63 missions, shot down 11 Japanese planes, went back home to Iowa, married his high school sweetheart, had 4 children, and worked as a crop duster for nearly 4 decades. Every year on August 17th, he called McKenna to thank him for saving his life. Mitchell also made it through the war, became a squadron commander, and led his men through the Philippines campaign. He downed 16 enemy planes and stayed in the Air Force until retiring as a colonel in 1963. He always told his young mechanics about McKenna's modification, reminding them that sometimes the best solutions come from the people working on the ground, not the engineers at the top. McKenna himself left the Air Force in 1946, returned to California, and opened his own auto repair shop in Long Beach 2 years later. He worked on engines for more than 40 years and rarely spoke about his wartime service. When asked, he would just say, "I fixed airplanes. That's all." In 1991, a military historian researching P-38 modifications found mentions of the piano wire tensioner in old records. He tracked McKenna down, then 73 and still working part-time in his garage. McKenna confirmed the story, but said it wasn't anything special, just something that needed to be done. The historian later estimated that McKenna's small modification may have saved between 80 and 100 American pilots. McKenna said he never kept count. He just remembered the men who came back alive. Hayes, Mitchell, Watkins, and the others. That was enough for him. James McKenna passed away in 2006 at age 88. His obituary mentioned his service as an aircraft mechanic in World War II, but not the piano wire that changed how American planes fought, or how it helped turn the tide of the Pacific Air War. His old garage still stands in Long Beach, now under new ownership. On one of the back office walls, there's a faded photo of a young mechanic beside a P-38 Lightning. The date on the back reads, August 1943, New Guinea. That's how real innovation happens in war, not through high-level orders or meetings, but through ordinary mechanics and soldiers who see problems, find answers, and act before it's too late.